how do they function? There is one child in the Homesteady family who is highly, highly goal-oriented.
Mm-hmm. And she's one of the younger ones, too. She's not the oldest.
She wants to be able to have a campfire outside.
Right.
So she knew that she needed to have rocks to make this campfire.
So she started fishing for rocks. And it was raining, and she still went out there, and she was, you know, and that was another thing. That was their big mistake. Their biggest mistake is, here is what the average summer looks like. Here is what the average weather looks like. If you live anywhere in the world right now, you have probably not had average weather for the past 5 years at least. We have watched it go from a week to 2 weeks, not continuous, but over the course of an entire summer of 95 to 100 degree weather, to being 2 solid months this year where it hit over 100 degrees every single day.
Yeah.
And we're high altitude. So every place has had terrible weather, and yet they assumed that they would not have any terrible weather in Alaska, and they just happened to hit the wettest, rainiest weather. Well, when it's wet and rainy in Alaska, it's 50 to 60 degrees.
It's perfect temperature.
Perfect temperature, but not if you live in a house that's kept at 72.
Yeah. So, well, you want to look at your other family members and figure out what's going to motivate them. For somebody who must live on the internet or must live with an electronic game, there's going to be some serious adjustment.
Yeah.
And it's highly likely to be a problem.
Right.
So that's part of it. You also need to assess your collective skill set: electric, plumbing, general building. If you don't have those skills and your partner doesn't have those skills, life is not going to be fun if you have to fix anything. You know, Irene and I share a lot of skills in common. We don't have the same working style.
No.
You know, Irene wants to do everything on paper with measurements and everything, and I look at what the situation is and recognize
he wants to wing it.
And I recognize that there's very few walls that are going to be plumb. There's very few angles are going to be right angles. There's going to be all manner of things. The older a house gets, the more it gets to be not plumb and not right angles.
What we do in order to not kill one another with an axe is we decide who's running the project.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't kill me with an axe.
No, it might be a shovel. But we decide who's running the project.
Yeah.
You know, if we're doing electrical, it's definitely Henry. I can do electrical. It's not my favorite thing, but I follow instructions well. If it's plumbing, it depends on which one of us is doing it. A lot of times we do that separately. So you're doing your own thing. If we're working on a project together, like when we put up the newest rack for the solar panels, it was his design, and so I said, okay, it's your design. You tell me what to do.
And she did, and it works just fine.
And it works fine. But you have to establish that truce before you get into it. Otherwise, you're going to get into it.
In more than one way.
Yeah.
And you know, that's really kind of the takeaway from watching this show going on now for many years. There's a lot of good information on that channel, and there's really good information to extract from their current experiences that they've talked about in Alaska.
Right. And, you know, they went to set up an outside kitchen because they didn't want to cook in the house. It's a tiny house.
It's a cabin.
It's a cabin. They knew it was an A-frame cabin. They had pictures. And yet somehow they managed to turn this into Shangri-La until they got there and discovered it was an A-frame cabin that was very basic. You could not live there in the wintertime because it's uninsulated.
Yeah.
So it's a summer cabin that was designed as a getaway. When you go to a summer cabin that's designed as a getaway, you don't expect luxury, generally speaking, unless you're paying for a very expensive Airbnb. You know, or maybe you're going to Finland to one of the fancy snowmobile thingies up there. But if you're going to just some ordinary place that's been advertised as a back-to-basics cabin, it's going to be a back to basics cabin.
Yeah. So this is going to, if the lessons get learned, this is going to be great for them because they have raw land, they have a driveway, they have a building pad that's kind of cut out. I think they're going to change their mind about where on that property they want to build for a lot of reasons. They're examining alternative building materials, whether it's going to be a yurt, whether it's going to be adobe mud, whether it's going to be super adobe or hyper adobe or anything else.
And we know people who have lived in yurts. We followed one family for years that lived in a yurt, and she got to the point where she's like, I can't do this anymore. I have to have a house, because they live in an area with bears and stuff. And I remember her saying one time, you know, there's a bear outside the door, and her husband wasn't home. And she was terrified that this bear was going to come in and eat the kids, you know. Here, bears are extremely rare. Extremely rare. They do get them down in the mountains in Prescott. They do get them sometimes up in the Flagstaff area. But in our area, it's too dry. So you should never say never about anything. But in general, you're not going to have trouble with bears here. So you could sit there and say, okay, I don't really have to worry about that. There's another family that we know here who's lived in a yurt for years. Now, yurts have to be refurbished. There was another family on YouTube that we followed for a number of years, but they basically completely restructured their yurt. There's almost nothing left of the original building because everything leaked. They couldn't insulate it, you know, because it was getting older, and these things are not in yurts in their native habitat, which is Siberian tundra. Mongolia. The Mongolian yurts are not permanent structures.
They get broken down and they get moved.
Yeah, they are seasonal structures used by herding people. They move to an area, they set it up, they do whatever they're going to do for a month, 2 months, 3 months, then they move on to another location. So the thing gets taken down, repairs are made in the process of taking it down and putting it back up, and it's put on someplace else. You get rid of the bugs, you get rid of the rodents that have moved in, you get rid of all that when you move to the next location. When you have a permanent structure like that, they're not really permanent. I think the covers on even the best yurts have to be replaced every 10 years.
Something like that.
Yeah, and you have to look at the individual guarantees, warranties. But you have to really look at these things. You know, how long are you going to put up a yurt so that you can live in it while you build your permanent structure? We lived in an old RV here for several years.
Mobile home.
It's an old. We had an RV, and we had while you were getting the mobile home fixed up, and then we lived in the RV. And actually, we were living in the RV during part of the year, and in the mobile home the other part of the year, because one air conditioned better than the other, and in terms of airflow, not in terms of air conditioning. Yeah. But we lived there because we knew we were building a house, and there was an end game involved. We knew that after a certain point, the house would be habitable, and we'd be inside.
Where I am on this whole thing is, if you're not handy and your partner's not handy, you're going to be in a load of hurt. And
handy does not mean being able to go down to Target and choose the correct pillows for your living room decor. No, that's having good decor sense.
So you need to have some skills.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, you need to have the basic home repair skills. Mm-hmm. You need to be able to do electrical. Mm-hmm. You need to be able to do plumbing. You need to be able to do heating, whatever form that takes wherever you're going to live. And I will tell you that the number of people that I've advised over the past 5 years that if they're going to build, they will have to be the general contractor. Mm-hmm. There's one fellow in North Carolina that I had very lengthy conversations privately with, and he
was very cocky about the fact that he was going to design this massive house, and then he was going to get this contractor to come in. What did they look for, 2 years for a contractor?
2 years looking for a contractor, and he finally told me, yeah, I'm going to be the general contractor because I can't get anybody to come up and do this work because we're too remote. We don't have electricity on site that's hooked to the power grid. All the things that you can think of that could go wrong. And so all of these people, all these trades, may or may not be willing to come up to your place.
You look at it from their perspective. They can stay down in Prescott, where there are probably 20 subdivisions under current construction. And they can have all the work that they want, either working for the contractors who are building the subdivisions or just doing regular repair and home renovation in that area. They don't have to drive an extra 25, 35 miles. They don't have to think about gasoline, time on the road, wear and tear on the vehicles. Oh, they get out to your place and you don't have water, or you don't have power, or you don't have whatever. From a purely financial standpoint, it makes sense for them to stay down there and not come up here.
Yeah, here, there, wherever it is.
Yeah.
That's the same story. When you move rural and you're going to build a homestead from raw land,
yeah.
you have more issues to be concerned about than you can think about. Mm-hmm. Well, you know what? We've been going on for a while. We need to wrap this up. And I think from your perspective, what have you learned most from what we've seen?
We thought we were ready when we moved out here. Right?
We had a good collection of skills.
Yes. But it was way harder than we could have ever imagined. If I had to do over again, would I do it? No, I wouldn't.
I would, but not here.
Yeah, not here. I mean, I wouldn't mind moving off grid and out in the sticks and stuff like that, but I wouldn't do it here. Some places, you know, like the people were busy making fun of the lady that was looking for food delivery the other day. And she says, I don't know why you guys are so mean. You don't have to be mean about this. I was just trying to find out what was going on because the app says it's available and it's not. And she's got problems with a knee, so she tries not to get up and wander around on it too much. And I'm like, well, you shouldn't have moved out here. I mean, I hate to say that, but you shouldn't have moved out here. And I've met other people here that I'm like, what are you doing out here? You can barely replace a light bulb, you know, much less a light switch, much less a light fixture. So you don't belong out here. You know, as this area develops, and we expect to see a lot of development in the next 5 years because we have 3 truck stops going in town, 3. And the first one should be open in the next month, I'm guessing. It was supposed to be open this past month.
They were paving the lot. Okay,
yeah. The lot wasn't paved yet, but everything else seemed like it was pretty much in view. And they had all the signs on the building and everything else. You know, we expect a lot of development here in the next 5 years. And at that point, it'll probably be more like when you're living in Williams, where you can get contractors and stuff. There will still be a limited number of contractors, and the good guys will stay fully booked. And that's the one thing I do hear from people out here is if you can find somebody who will work and actually show up, they are so fully booked that it's not going to happen as an emergency. It's just not, you know. So you need to have enough skills, you know. But we thought we were ready. In comparison to most people, we were ready. The standard joke is if you make it through the first 3 months, you might stay. If you make it through 6 months, there's a much better chance you'll stay. If you make it through a winter, you'll probably stay. Because there's all these things that can go wrong that are just more than you could imagine. You know, my girlfriend who lives in the Eastern Sierras said, my gosh, you guys have a big pantry.
We have a pantry that can keep us for several months.
Yeah, easily. And not get bored. I mean, we have a freezer full of food. We have canned meat that we have canned ourselves. We have, if we buy dry beans and stuff like that, we'll make a big batch and can them so that we have fast food, you know, but it's ours. We know what's in it, and it's made exactly with the right spices and everything. We have that resource. Our big sticking point is always going to be water. And if we had to, we have 2,500 gallons of rainwater sitting there, and a couple of other small caches of rainwater that we've used the water from the cattle tank out here in an emergency when we had pipes go bad a number of years ago. And we just kept a bucket in the bathroom, in the shower, so that when you needed to flush the toilet, you poured water down the toilet.
So what I took away from this latest series of Homesteady shows is that when you're going to consider going off-grid on raw land, You need to really disassociate yourself from your family in terms of thinking. You need to look objectively at yourself, your partner, and anybody else in your family.
Right.
And this can be brutal.
Oh, well, it was kind of the lesson that happened during COVID, lockdown. The number of mothers that I saw post on Facebook saying, I never realized what god-awful brats my children were until I was stuck at home with them 7 days a week. And they had electricity and stuff, so they could still stick them in front of the TV. But all of a sudden, these demanding children that their teachers had put up with all along, they were having to help with the homeschooling because the kids were still expected to keep up with school, and they discovered what brats they had.
Yeah. So you
so you have to be harsh. You can't sit there and go, oh, she's just a little moody. No, she can be a brat. She can be horrible to her siblings. Okay, well, they're all going to be sleeping in the same room. How are we going to work this out?
So there's a lot of things to consider, but you really have to get dispassionate about viewing yourself, your spouse, and the rest of your family, and anybody else who's going to come along for the ride. Mm-hmm. That's not easy.
We've seen other people get really, I don't want to say screwed, but really kind of shafted by family members that they thought were going to be providing income because they were going to be renters on the property and stuff like that, and they decided this was way too much of a hassle. So they split.
The other thing you really need to be thinking about is how resilient are you mentally?
Yeah.
And it's really mental that's the issue. Can you deal with an emergency without coming apart? Can you deal with the setbacks? Can your spouse deal with the setbacks? How will you respond? You never know until you get in the situation. You never know.
But you know, if you could, but I still go back to the rough camping. If you can't take the family out for even just 2 or 3 days and have everybody keep the peace and be able to negotiate and work it through and everything else, wow, you got to rethink this. And then, okay, so they survived the 3 or 4 days. Well, let's go for a whole week and a half.
Yeah, so
and let's do some real rough camping.
And we've camped for many, many years, sometimes for 2 weeks at a time, sometimes for a week at a time, sometimes a few days, sometimes longer. Mm-hmm. So, well, look, thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications because we've got a lot more stuff going on.
Yeah, got it. We kind of took the day off a little bit today, goofing off. Catching up on some videos.
I pulled a muscle. I'm not going to say where.
He went in his lower back. He pulled a muscle right there. So I basically stuck him in a chair and threw a heating pad on him. And I did some work online, but mostly we goofed off. We will be doing other things. I have a bunch of work to do down in the studio. This week is going to be crazy because I have a checkup for standard yearly testing thing. The dog does not have a checkup, but the cat does. She needs all of her shots. My class that was supposed to be last week got moved to this week, so that's another thing that's going on. So yeah, just lots going on.
Never an end in sight.
No. Like just a little less chaos sometimes. Just a little bit. So until next time, bye.